Game loaded.
1. Hi, and welcome to an edition of Lessons Learned with your host, Rafael Piñero. Welcome back again to the Mass Effect and Gaming podcast with GlutyPal. Say hello, GlutyPal.
Hi, everybody.
Today we're going to be tackling another subject from the Mass Effect universe, identity and gender. Specifically, we're going to be talking about EDI, that is the Enhanced Defense Intelligence, a character that appears in Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. I have a lot of ideas about that because it's a very interesting character arc that she goes through the game, and especially in the third game. And the fact that we identify her as a she is key to that character arc. So let's introduce EDI. EDI is the AI that comes equipped, or is part of the equipment that comes with the new Normandy SR2, as built by Cerberus, and becomes the home base of Shepard and their team as they go through the galaxy hunting down the collectors.
Mm-hmm.
She has, or is voiced by Tricia Helfner, who you might have heard of as a former model, and also appeared on the remake of Battlestar Galactica as number 6, one of the Cylons. And that character was a character that was very much influenced by her sensuality and her sexuality. Although in her first appearance in the first game, EDI appears nothing more than a, holographic globe. It isn't until the third game that she gains a body. A very interesting body. So let's start with EDI as a disemboweled voice. And why does she have a female voice then?
You mean disembodied?
Yeah. Disemboweled would be something different.
Well, it's kind of, I believe that given the actress's, previous experience with the Battlestar Galactica, they had her, and, they couldn't really find a voice that was, non-binary, I guess, or it would have been a little difficult to do so. So they went with the actress, because if they had gone with a male voice actor whose voice was very prominently male, the EDI would have been male. I don't know. I think it's just easier for them that way to have a gender specific voice.
Yeah, we see, for example, on the VIs that appear throughout the series that they're basically either male or female. They're very strong typing therein. Like
right.
The VI that it runs basically is on the Citadel. Avina, I think, is her name, and she very much looks like an Asari. She's
right.
made to be an Asari. Other VIs are male, and they tend to be in certain positions of authority. And speak with a more authoritative voice. The VI on the M44 Mako, not the Mako, the Hammerhead, also has a male voice.
Right.
However, one could argue that Legion has a more, I would say, androgynous voice, more gender-neutral voice, although it was a male voice actor that did the voice for Legion. So, there's a possibility of moving a little.
See, and I don't know if I buy that whole thing about Legion, only for the pure fact that, in Mass Effect 2 and 3, they start to stop calling him it and start calling him he.
Well, that's part of the idea of identity, how other people refer to the individual, right? In the case of Legion, other people start referring to him or he. They use those pronouns. But Legion only uses I as a personal pronoun, or refers himself as Geth, as we are Geth.
We, yeah.
So they have a different perspective of what it is to be an entity. Even when they use their personal pronoun I, that doesn't necessarily attach to gender or sexuality. Just typing of an individual.
Right.
Says, I am, don't refer to me as a he or she. He doesn't say that at any point. Others do so. But even then, the fact that Legion doesn't seem to have any sexual characteristics, only broadly the shape of a Quarian, mostly because of the legs and the hands, um, is genderless. Physically speaking, seems to be genderless. Yes, yet the default seems to be to call him a he.
Right, but the reason why I was saying that is because, like, I don't personally see his voice as being non-binary gender-wise, and because, the characters of Mass Effect see him as being male because, his voice sounds male. That's the only way to really judge it, is by how his voice sounds.
Yeah, but again, you have that because he lacks any identity as other than one assigned to him. And that's a good contrast with Edie, where Edie seems to be seeking to identify herself with an entity, right? She's assigned one by Cerberus, by giving the voice and perhaps the attitude. And then that is reinforced by choosing the body to take over the body of the other AI, which is Eva Corey, an agent for Cerberus. But she seems to be in search of an identity. Like, for example, her relationship with Joker seems to be a sort of an experiment at first. And she wants to know what that is all about. She's curious about it. She might be attracted to Joker. How much can we tell? It's very difficult to tell exactly, but she seems to be intrigued by the idea. And overall, especially when you're talking to a femchep, she seems to have a strong identity with both of them. So she's the one who's seeking to self-identify as much as he is as identified by others.
Well, see, I think with her, there's an entirely legit reason, because if you read her codex, she started out as a VI that got into the Moon's database and started causing a whole bunch of havoc. And Cerberus obtained the VI program and turned her into an AI that became Edie.
Yeah, her core programming is a mixture of the VI that went haywire on Luna base and also Reaper technology. And there's also even commentary about her voice, like they chose a voice and that voice seems to be particularly attractive. A side note to real life, when the United States Air Force was testing voice systems to warn pilots of a imminent crash, going to be too low to the ground, the test they did suggested that female voices were not so much more attractive, but that male pilots, or even female pilots, tended to be more attentive to those voices. So perhaps there's a little bit of that. I don't know how much research Bioware team did on that or not, but that's a sort of a real life aside we should consider as well. But instead, I mean, sure, she was created by Cerberus, and I guess they decided from the get-go to give her certain tendencies. But at some point, she becomes independent. At the end of Mass Effect 2, she becomes independent. She could have chosen any other identity. In fact, I think Shepard suggests that why does she identify as an Asari? And she basically says, well, I tried to ask Liara about it, but she wasn't very forthcoming.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always that option. Which brings the question, of course, of gender identity and sexual identity. Is something that we choose, which seems a possibility with Edie, or as it is in the rest of the Mass Effect universe, something that you're born with.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Personally, I don't think we really choose our gender. I mean, we kind of discover what we feel our gender is later, like, experiencing life. You identify, I believe, as male,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I identify by female.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people that may have felt that they were they were given that gender, but they felt like like they were an entirely different gender, and they didn't really realize what that feeling was until they started finding out a little bit more about gender identity, because when you grow up, you don't really know that you can change your gender until you're like exposed to that. so you believe that you have to fit into one of these boxes of male or female. If you're non-binary, you're kind of screwed until somebody says, "Hey, non-binary exists."
Yeah, but again, let's say that Edie's not so much choosing but discovering her identity.
Mm-hmm.
To sort of align into what you just said about the whole process, which is very true. We sort of discover ourselves as we go along.
Right.
And it's more of a situation where she seems to be fulfilling a specified role and feeling comfortable in that role, as opposed to challenging it.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been, I think, very interesting if Edie would have, in fact, challenged the roles that was assigned to her. Like, for example, if she's assigned a female voice, but she chooses not to identify with that,
right.
Or choose, for example, in not only gender but also sexual performance. She's having a romance with Joker, and the talk of sex just comes up almost immediately. They may choose to be asexual, right?
Right.
Or discover that because she is not organic, that she doesn't have the same needs as an organic, for example, reproduction, and therefore from that doesn't extend the need, for example, for sexual attraction or sexual performance in any way. By the way, sexuality is far more complex than that. It doesn't mean that you don't have. I mean, you can be romantic and asexual. You can be sexual and aromantic. It's more complicated than that, and I'm just condensing it for for discussion's sake.
Right. Right. No, I completely understand what asexual is personally. I personally identify as demisexual, so not that far off from asexual. But in terms of with Edie regarding that topic, if you think back, Edie didn't really talk about any kind of like sexual attraction to anybody. I mean, she seemed really fascinated by a trainer having a sexual attraction to her, but it didn't really seem like she was interested in engaging in anything like that at all. It just seemed like, she was fascinated by it, and she's fascinated by the prospect of possibly having a relationship with Joker. And the whole relationship thing is really the only thing she really pursues. In terms of like the whole sexual aspect of a relationship, she doesn't really express much of an interest in that at all. The only one who really expresses anything resorting to anything similar to that is Joker.
Well, I was watching, or I was re-recording a conversation that she has originally with Shepard, and the way she opens the conversation is she basically makes a statement that Shepard has had significant sexual experience.
Right.
So I think, yes, she's exploring that, but I think that she is both open to the possibility, and she sees it as sort of part and partial of sort of the process of being. Whether eventually it would be off camera, of course, it happened. We don't get to see it in the game, so it's only speculation. Mm-hmm. Also, she seems to be very curious about, for example, if you have a romance with Tali, male Shepard, and you go into Dreadnought, she makes pointed commentary about, hey, you work together, to the point where Shepard says, thank you, Edie, come on, So part of her might be just that she knows that humans and other organic beings are sort of uncomfortable with that, and she's just part of her, humor heuristics, teasing as well. Also, and this goes more to the designers, right? We go back to the idea of designers that they chose Miss Helfner as a voice, and then they chose to have a storyline in which she inhabits a, very fan servicey body.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that, in my personal opinion, she looks more naked with clothing than without it. And her platform really even has high heels built into it. So clearly the signals are, very much prototypical female. And that's the identity that the designers chose for her.
Right.
And I'd like your thoughts about that.
In terms of like the body that she got, I definitely think that her body is a little fan servicey because, I mean, I get that she was given a female voice, and it was a disembodied voice, and she really had no body assigned with that voice. And then Mass Effect 3 rolls around, and she has this, atypical, what is expected of the female body, more or less. The curvature, the large breasts, the large hips, that sort of thing. It's a very sexualized body, given that Edie, like I mentioned before, doesn't seem to express much sexual interest beyond, mild fascination. And the only reason, touching back on what we just recently spoke about, the only reason I feel that she actually mentioned anything about sexual experience is because she's only been surrounded by, couples that have paired romance with sexuality. So it's possible that she might think that, love and sexuality are, go hand in hand, and that's not necessarily the case. But yeah, I definitely think that for an AI robot that is not typically sexual, that she was inherently sexualized.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because even the way she emerges the first time she appears in a new body, so she appears out of a cloud of steam and smoke, right? Kind of suggesting, a woman stepping out of a bath, which is a very specific erotic imagery, right? And even if you use some of the fly cam, the way she's walking out of it, she seems to be walking like a model, like she's stretching her arms and legs, and which kind of makes sense because it's supposed to be a new platform. But still, it's sort of very evocative of that particular image, right? This is, almost Venus de Milo, Venus emerging from the waves, that kind of thing. So the very specific messaging attached to her, and then later on when you can put her in some clothes. For some reason, BioWare decided to highlight certain aspects of her anatomy. I'm not going to go into what exactly. You can just do the search, on Google. It will have plenty of results. But just to say that, there are certain camera angles that are very specific, which is, again, kind of surprising. Of course, they also made the Banshees to be very anatomically correct as well. Which is pretty weird decision to make. But again, it sort of falls into this sort of track record that the designers of Mass Effect have with being very fan service, to male players or to players that are attracted to females.
Well, yeah, definitely. No, I definitely, and I think that there's a lot of examples of that, such as if you look at several of the conversations with Miranda, you get plenty of shots where your camera is like half encompassing her ass.
Yeah, the butt shots are plenty. Although they try to then temper that with doing some of that as well, especially with Jacob and some of the other characters. Even they threw in one with Kaidan in Mass Effect 3. I don't know if it happens to a male Shep, but I know that it definitely happens to a femme Shep. She basically gets to stare at his bottom. And sort of like, well, we gave this much fan service to this side of the aisle. Let's throw in a little tidbits here and there for the other side of the spectrum, I suppose. But at times, at least, it's so blatant at times, it just goes both at awkward and just comical.
Right.
But not, at least to me, regardless of who is on camera, after a while it loses any sensuality to it. It's like, okay, I get what you're trying to club me over the head with. I get it. I'm not stupid,
Right. Well, and in my experience of playing Mass Effect, like I could go the entire game without, getting a shot of Jacob or Kaidan's butt. But if I'm playing Mass Effect 3 as an example, I can't really avoid that. I get stuck with Miranda's butt in my face always.
That's true.
Because if you're playing the main storyline, I mean, you can avoid it, but you can't avoid it if you want to keep Miranda alive.
And also her upgraded suit when you gain your loyalty. There is another, if you get one of the DLC, she has a suit that's more of an armor, so it's more balanced. But even her loyalty suit, it's even supposed to be a bit shinier, and it's the same materials, just the way the color and palette, etc., and the way the light plays on it makes it feel like it's even tighter, more of a tight cat suit than the original. Which, considering the original, it's an achievement.
Right.
What kind of achievement? I don't know, but it is an achievement. Talking about Kaidan, going back to that subject, because we're talking about gender and sexuality, there was a decision in the original Mass Effect to have Kaidan be bisexual, and then perhaps pressure from Microsoft Games, they removed it.
Yeah, they retconned it.
It's in the game files, but it's not in-game itself. Although when, for example, when male Shepard has a conversation with Kaidan, the way the conversation goes very similar to the way it goes with FemShep, except that in terms of tone and attitude, except that a male Shepard is not given a chance to either pursue or deny that, the follow-up of the romance. And then it's not until Mass Effect 3 that is made clear that A, Kaidan is bisexual, and B, that he is in fact interested in a male Shepard as well as a female Shepard.
Right.
What are the implications of that exactly?
Like, what do you mean by implications?
The implication of having a character that was built one way that got basically hidden. They buried their bisexual character, and then later on decided, no, wait, we're going to retcon it again to have the character be bisexual.
Okay. Right? Well, basically, we know that Kaidan was intended to be bisexual in the Mass Effect 1. Every character, they had Kaidan that was intended to be bisexual, then you had Liara that's bisexual because of her race. And I think Ashley is the only one that's straight. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then, those were the only 3 romances in Mass Effect 1. And, back then when that game was coming out, you had a lot of issues with gay romance. The only reason why I believe that they kept Liara as bisexual is, one, because she's an alien and it is explained why she would be in her race's codex, and then you have the fact that female on female is perceived as more acceptable than male on male. So
it's perceived most acceptable, and we see it a lot even now on TV where representation of romance, usually female on female, is the one that it's a default.
Right.
To the point that, and bringing in another news, is that the death of a bisexual or lesbian character, I believe, in a recent show, the 100, really upset a lot of the fans. To the point that they sort of look back and said, oh, look at all the lesbian or bisexual female characters who killed, Hollywood has killed over the last 10 years or so, which goes all the way back to the Hays Code, which we might talk about it in some other program. But in the case of Mass Effect, I think it's because it's acceptable to men, right? The female lesbian pairings are acceptable to male players as part of the girl-on-girl fantasy. And we talked about this before, but I'm going to say it again, which is one of the laziest fantasies out there, because essentially is 3 minus 1. The idea being that women are inherently sexual creatures, and they will basically jump at any opportunity to be sexual, but that without a man present, it is incomplete. So the fantasy has 2 women engaging sexual activity, starting the sexual activity, and then minutes later, whatever, the man enters the room, so to speak, and then the real sex begins.
Right.
It's ludicrous, but it's part of the fantasy. even if you naturally don't see it that played out that way. But it's implied in that fantasy.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why Liara's pairing as being bisexual
was perceived as more acceptable.
Exactly. But that changes again. In Mass Effect 3, we have both a female lesbian character and a male gay character, and we have Cadence being bisexual. What changed?
I think that, because here's the thing is that when Mass Effect 3 originally came out, they got a lot of backlash for having a male romance scene. They got a lot of backlash from that, from the fandom, basically because the whole thing was that, male homosexuality has been an uphill battle. And I'm not going to say, that female homosexuality hasn't, because, for a long time it's been a sexual fetish. And it hasn't really been represented very well in many facets of the media. But not male bisexuality, but male homosexuality or, male-on-male romances have hardly been depicted at all. Primarily, and this is my own personal speculation, because it is perceived by society as a whole that male-on-male romances are taboo, and they're taboo because it is a man willingly putting himself into what is perceived as a female position. And if you ever look through society, a man putting himself in what is perceived as an inherently female position is considered lesser. Anything perceived as female is perceived as lesser. Being weak, being vulnerable, being emotional. You shouldn't cry. What are you, a girl? That sort of mindset is inherent in society, and I think it's part of the reason why male homosexuality is not as accepted, or wasn't as accepted, 10-ish or more years ago. And, going back to when Mass Effect 1 came out, that mentality still was heavy in society. And it's gradually started to lift over the years, but it was still really bad when Mass Effect 3 came out, which is why they received such a heavy backlash. But then, when you had Dragon Age Inquisition recently come out, you had a much better response to Dorian and, the bisexual characters like Iron Bull, who, if you don't romance him or Dorian, actually have a very open male-on-male relationship, and it's much more accepted now by the fandom. But switching back to when Mass Effect 3 came out, it wasn't as accepted back then. And plus, there are feelings within the fandom that these characters were not, a very good interpretation of male homosexuality or female homosexuality, with a trainer.
Yeah, which brings me to the subject of James bonding, which is something that's always existed, but it actually came to my mind when I went over the situation with Dragon Age 2 and also Mass Effect 2, but specifically Dragon Age 2, where all the characters that were romanceable were made bisexual. And I realized, and I'm going to try to explain the process, my thought process, so to make sure that it's easy to follow. At first it upset me, and I said, wait a minute, why am I being upset by the fact that bisexuals exist? Well, that shouldn't upset me because they're real people and they exist.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I engage in any kind of behavior or not, whether I approve or not, they're going to exist. They don't need my approval. It's part of reality, and art, even fantasy, particularly fantasy, tends to reflect certain aspects of reality. So the fact that these characters exist shouldn't be even a question. The question was why the characters were positioned that way, and it seemed to me that they were positioned in such a way that they were designed to fulfill the sexual aspect of the power fantasy, of the hero's power fantasy. So whether you played a male Hawk or a female Hawk, you were going to have, that aspect of being too able to romance. James Bonding, all men want, all women want him, all men want to be like him,
Mm-hmm.
kind of idea. And said, wait a minute, if it happens to a woman, does it upset me if the character is male and all these women are made available to him, right? And I thought, yeah, it kind of does. Because the idea basically is that these characters become two-dimensional, right?
Mm-hmm.
They exist primarily to fulfill that fantasy, and whatever depth they had in other areas seems to be diminished. They're created for that purpose and that purpose alone. So we go back to Liara in some aspect. We go back to Miranda Lawson. Although you have more variety in Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3.
Mm-hmm.
We go to Trainer. We go to Cortez. And in those instances, most of the time it seems that their sexuality doesn't exist as something that comes from them, either discovery or just something in makeup of their character, but rather to give, and in fact a lot of fans have sort of asked for this, which is sort of complicates the situation even more, to fulfill some sort of a quota. Oh, there were X amount of romances for this group, then why don't we have Y amount for us, right?
Right.
Reducing the characters to their sexual component, and not even their sexual component, only as seen as opportunities for the player to express their sexuality and nothing else. Which is fine, I suppose, if you are creating a James Bond type game, right? That's part of the premise.
Right.
And you go like, well, this is James Bond. This is part of it. I either accept it and go with it, or I reject it and criticize it and go somewhere else, right? I mean, you can still criticize it. But in a company like BioWare that prides itself in creating deep narratives with interesting characters to fuel and guide their games, the use of James Bonding sort of detracts from it. And I think they, talking about, again, Dorian and Ironbull and others, they were learning those lessons, Dragon Age Inquisition. They said, you know what? Especially, I made a video comparing Cortez with Dorian. The way the Dorian's homosexuality is treated is as it's something that brings conflict with his family. It's based on conflicts with his society, the expectations therein. And you don't have to be in a romance for that to come up.
Right.
At all, right? You could. He's a very interesting character. But it's not part of the romance arc. It's part of his personal arc.
Right.
Where in Dragon Age 2, it's just part of the romance arc because reasons, including Anders, I think, got changed from being readily a straight character to a gay. Really, let's honest. At least for me, let's be honest. Anders is a gay character in Dragon Age 2.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
just made bisexual to be available to female players, He should have been just gay.
Well, yeah, because, if you romance him as a male Hawk, he actually, I believe he specifies that he actually has more of an attraction to men.
Yeah, well, he recounts he basically justifies sort of apparently the change in the character by saying that he encountered another man in his recent past, and that changed his mind, etc. But it seems that, all aspects of Anders are a radical departure to his introduction in Awakening. But that seems to be the one that seems more surprising. And again, if they just gone with the character just being gay, I think, well, fine, the character's gay. Just because they didn't say that he wasn't gay in the first game doesn't mean that he couldn't be gay now. I mean, it wasn't. No characters were romanceable in Awakening, and rarely, aside from a few jokes, did the character's sexuality ever come up.
Well, and
in that DLC.
And just to be fair, being bisexual doesn't mean that, you're attracted to both genders equally. I know many bisexuals who identify as bisexual, but they have a gender leaning towards one gender or another. Some some bisexuals might prefer females while others might prefer males. It's not really a completely equal thing all the time with bisexuality. They're not always attracted to either gender equally. If they identify as bisexual, then they're bisexual. But with Anders, it does definitely feel like he was initially made to be straight because he flirted with females a lot. and definitely, acted like what is perceived as the stereotypical heterosexual male. But then you have Dragon Age 2 that came along, and he suddenly had a complete 180, which, the fans definitely complained about that. But, I think we might be talking about Dragon Age a little too much, given that this is supposed to be about Mass Effect.
Well, it's about games and BioWare in general. We like to talk about Mass Effect a lot because it's the game we share. And we're going to steer the situation back to Mass Effect in just a second. But a final word on that is talk about bisexuality. I think if we've seen that kind of bisexuality where people have preferences, and again, it's something that belongs to the character, like, well, one could argue Liara because of her race, then it's fine, right? But the way it was treated in Dragon Age 2 and in many ways it was treated with Liara originally was a question of availability. And a lot of fans see it that way or seem to express that way. You have to make the characters available to us for some reason. And to me, that seems to be I have a conflict of it because there's the right, I suppose, and the need for people to have the player character reflect who they are at a certain level.
Well,
it's one of the reasons why people play this game.
Right.
So making a demand of a player character being able to express race and gender and sexuality and all those things is not a bad thing to do, especially when you have a track record or company providing those choices. The other side of the coin is that whatever sexuality you have in a character, an NPC, should stem from that character and be one of many, not just a single way of characterizing this character, but one of many. Which brings me to Mass Effect 3 and Trainer and Cortez, and particularly Cortez, at least perhaps because I was a guy, as a straight guy, I was more aware of this perhaps than with Trainer. He seems to be very much almost always announcing the fact that he was gay. I had a husband. Okay. My husband is dead. I miss my husband. Oh, woe of me, I am alone. And should I remind you that I was married to a man? And it's sort of the constant reminder. It's like, yeah, I get it. And you're also supposed to be a very cool pilot and an ace pilot on a shuttle and do all these other things. But when 9 out of 10 conversations with you, regardless of, who's talking, is, oh, by the way, I miss my dead husband because I'm gay and used to be married to a man, it's like, can we get a little more than that?
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people felt that Cortez was not a very good representation of a gay character, because he did bring it up a lot. It became, unfortunately, it seemed like being gay was like 9/10 of who he was as a character. And, sexuality is not everything that makes up a person, obviously. So we didn't really get a whole lot of depth with Cortez. We only got like glimpses into who he was as a person, which is why I think Dorian was a lot more successful as a gay character. And, going back to the whole DA2 thing with all the characters being bisexual, the entire fandom was really upset about all these characters being bisexual because, they were complaining that it didn't have realism, that, it wasn't realistic for all these characters to be bisexual or to have this orientation towards Hawk. Like, they didn't actually have this, like, a sexuality. They just wanted Hawk regardless of what gender they were. So, people were like, we want characters that are, their own, that are not gravitating towards who we are as the main character. That, it's realistic in the sense that they have their own preferences. Instead of being main character sexual. And, BioWare granted that. And then you have another side of the fandom that complained because, well, I wanted to romance this character and they're not available to me, and that's not fair. So, you got two sides of the coin in the fandom, and, one side's going to get what they want and the other side's going to complain, and vice versa. So, personally, I mean, in my own opinion, I like that the characters had their own identity because I feel like it gave more to the story, and it gave more to the characters. People aren't always going to agree, and, opinions are opinions. But, I feel like, like this goes back to the whole thing with Caden, where Caden was initially supposed to be bi, and then he wasn't, for whatever reason, and then people complained about, bisexual erasure, so then BioWare made him bi again. Which, it's kind of, we don't know for sure if he was supposed to be one way or the other, we just know what he originally was intended to be, and then they changed that. And then they made him bi again.
Yeah, but I think because they had that erasure, because you didn't see Caden, that aspect of Caden from the beginning, and therefore sort of develop over the 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
And the aspect that was shown was one that sort of reinforced his, tendency, heterosexual tendency. For example, the comments he makes about, the art of Yahtzee.
Mm-hmm.
The comments he makes about seeing Edie's body, and the people that he's dated in the past and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems that, yes, he wasn't made so much bisexual, he was made Shepard sexual.
Yeah.
Although, again, going back to Mass Effect 1, it seems that, you look at the interactions between male Shep or fem Shep and Caden, the tone, the camera angles, etc., of the speakers seem to be very similar. It could be simply because they were just, trying to save time, but also because that was in the game that you could do from the get-go and simply was eliminated. So the sort of the end of that quest, if you will, the romantic quest, was simply cut off, which is unfortunate considering what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But and also a similar situation, very funny situation happens with Miranda. Miranda, I think, also had been suggesting that she was supposed to be bisexual as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard some recordings of FemChep talking about Tali and talking about Miranda. And in the 3rd game, when you're introduced or reintroduced to Miranda, the way she starts talking to you, regardless of whether you're playing a female Shepard or a male Shepard, seems very very sensual. Like she turns around, it's like, oh, there you are, sort of very excited to be there. Then the tone of the conversation changes. Whether that was simply done because they wanted to save time, that is, they just recorded the lines of Miranda saying the introduction, and that was it, or they perhaps were trying to, at some point, we're going to decide to make her bisexual again. We'll never know.
Well, see, I think the part of that whole reason might have been because, Miranda was intended to be the main romance for Mass Effect 2. You have, in a lot of BioWare games, you have the characters that are advertised as the default romance, like Isabella for Dragon Age 2, Liara for Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 3, and then, you had Miranda that was kind of advertised as the romance for Mass Effect 2. So I think, they might have done that for that reason, and, like you said, to save time, they just didn't, change it for if Shep romanced her or not. They just kind of kept that in there. Because, my first playthrough, I didn't really notice it, but then I kind of started to see a little bit, like my second or third playthroughs.
Yeah, it's very interesting that they have, and this is part of how the games have been marketed as well, right? You can't put every single character on a box or on screen at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So they make some conscious decisions to put certain characters forward. Liara. Also, I feel that in the case of Mass Effect 2, I think that although they created, for example, the character of Thane to be particularly attractive to women, the way the game is constructed seems to guide players to romance Garrus.
Yeah, because Thane, he's dying, and a lot of players are like, well, I don't want to have a heartbreak romance. They don't want to set themselves up knowingly for the heartbreak, with a character that they know is going to die. because, he dies fairly early in Mass Effect 3. So, and I do believe like some writers actually did mention that was a big mistake, hindsight 2020, because, they basically didn't give players the option to save him. They basically said, here's your romance, he's gonna die, have fun. And that was the end of it.
Well, yeah, but I think that the Doom romance aspect of that is part of the romance, right? I mean, how many stories have we not read and seen about one of the lovers just dying, and the lover's going to die, and that just makes it more tragic, and to some people that more attractive. So I think that was part of the makeup from the get-go. Although the question of this is reminds me of someone, you kind of in fandom you meet different people, and I made the comment about Thane dying with dignity in Mass Effect 3. Like, I actually liked the scene, and this particular fan of Thane's was to say that she was upset is to put it mildly. She really was upset. And I think one of the reasons why you had that scene in the Citadel DLC was to sort of give some of the fans of things like, oh yeah, we got closure, that aspect of closure, where everybody steps up and says very kind words about Thane, etc., in the funeral. And it also, talking about sex and romance and gender and all this, it brings a question that I think we're going to continue talking about this in a future program, but I wanted to touch it briefly here. The idea of ownership. The idea from the player's point of view that they own their Shepard, that these are their romances, that this is their story. Something that BioWare has strongly fomented throughout the games, and not only Mass Effect, but other products as well. And perhaps I think that's one of the reasons why there really are no winners in this situation, because once you create that strong sense of, from the player's point of view, that they own the story, that's their story, and you don't conform to every thing that they want to see, they're going to feel cheated.
Right. Like, I can understand that to a point, but it's like, you still need to keep it in the back of your head. You still need to keep in mind that, you did not have a hand in the development. The only thing that you really, as a fan, really gave them is what you would have wanted, which, if you're not part of the majority in that particular desire, you're not going to get that, especially, like, if it's not, what they have in mind for the story. There's some things that, just that are just not possible right now. Like, you see a lot of fans that say, well, I want my character to be able to hug this person whenever I want them to. And, that's very difficult as a game designer to do. And they've actually talked about this before, that it's very hard to portray hugs like that so readily without, making it look like the characters are pawing at each other. Because, there's, like, graphic limitations, so, you can't exactly portray everything you want. And, like, a lot of it has to do with, like, having characters go in a certain position and maneuvering camera angles just right. Which is how, like, they manage to get kisses to look good, because if you do flat cam, it kind of looks funny at certain angles. Because, hands aren't moving like they should, it looks realistic from certain camera angles, but in different camera angles, you can kind of see, like, hands are in the default kind of loose position, so it looks kind of funny. You got things like that to take into consideration. So, you're not always going to get what you want, because, like, it's a very large portion of the fandom that actually has been asking to be able to, like, hug and kiss their romance whenever they want.
Have a sort of a hug and kiss animation ready.
Right.
Kind of similar to when you have, like, backstabbing or assassination animations.
Right.
I suppose that would be cool the first few times you do it, but then it looks like a canned animation.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't look like something that happened naturally.
Right. Well, and that's like, that was just like one example of like the things that the fandom has been asking for that, BioWare as a game developer just can't deliver on. You have limitations, you have story limitations, you have other things to take into consideration that, you might not get what you want all the time, and, such is life.
Yeah. But within the context and the confines of what you get, I think we can certainly talk and criticize about it, and of course we can ask for at least a little bit of refinements, improvements, which I think is something they're always shooting for, which is great.
Right, which is what they asked for. Like, when they were seeking feedback on what people wanted for Dragon Age Inquisition, they were looking for what the fandom felt were mistakes versus what they felt were the strengths of the previous game, that they could, like the whole repeated background. They're like, okay, no repeated backgrounds. We gotta make all new levels. No characters that are all bisexual. So then, of course, they came out with characters that were, their own sexuality and were their own characters. And, were felt by a majority of the fandom to be very in-depth characters. And, like this is their process. They want to know what they should elaborate on in future games, and what mistakes they should avoid for next games, which is what I believe they were doing recently with Andromeda coming out.
It also brings the funniest, at least for me, the funniest moment in any playthrough of Mass Effect 3. I have basically, in this particular playthrough, I was playing very much a brochep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Break your heart, woman in every port, etc. And there's a moment where you invite specialist trainer, to your cabin, and essentially, of course, Shepard makes the moves, and he says, "Hey, you're talking to Shepard here, savior of the galaxy, conqueror of the collectors, etc., etc." And she goes, "No." And he was like, "Wait, I am the hero of the Citadel, the Battle Citadel. You've heard about that, of course. Shepard, first human Spectre, in 7, blah blah." And she goes like, "I'm not buying it." And that's when I went like, that is because the expression in Shepard's face, like he's trying to play it cool, but he's shocked, and that was hilarious. Like he just got shut down hard. And I like to see more of that, not only in Mass Effect, but in all kinds of games.
Mm-hmm.
Not that simply the shooting down and burning aspect, but have situations where you have unrequited loves, when you have romance arcs that are aborted, right? For whatever reason. That's, I think, one of the things I liked about, again, Dragon Age Inquisition, bringing it, because I recently romanced Cassandra Pentagast, my little Cassie. And she basically says, will they remember me as the protector of the Inquisitor? Which I think was a very nice role reversal, right? And I like to see things like that. I like to see when you don't always get what you want, or getting what you want is a little tougher than it used to be. Because it used to be with romances, BioWare romances, or other games that had them, that was pretty tough.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you couldn't romance anybody. You had to discover the fact that it could be romanced, right? I don't want it to be that difficult, but I would like to see a little more variety. Also, more representation. Again, we talked about this program of being aromantic, asexual, biromantic, being transgendered, with being sort of gender neutral, which is not the same thing, as well as straight and lesbian and gay. And I like to see more of that.
Mm-hmm. More diversity.
Have diversity in both expression and just existence, right? And an acknowledgement that, well, like anything else, sexuality is and gender are very important to people for who they are, part of who defines them. It is one of the many pillars that defines us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to have interesting characters that, reflect a certain depth, you have to acknowledge that and show it.
Right.
And maybe perhaps that will lead to more tempering of the audience's expectations. But we'll see about that.
Right. Well, because like just to elaborate a little bit on what you were saying is you want characters that go through struggles that you are familiar with, like Dorian with his family. Having family that's not accepting of your sexuality is something that many people in the LGBT community relate with heavily. So seeing a character that goes through similar struggles that you can relate to is huge. Having that degree of relatability to a character goes a very long way, and I think that's part of the reason why people want characters that are their own, that are highly developed, that are relatable and real. That's the reason why they're so in demand, is for that reason.
Yeah. So we will conclude this program with a shout out to and a link to the Laura K. Buzz GoFundMe page. It will be below in the link of this video. And the reason why she's having a GoFundMe page and campaign is because she is going through sexual realignment proceedings, operation therein, and other surgical proceedings. The reason she's doing that is, she is the UK editor for Destructoid, and the UK does have an excellent, up to this point, National Health Service, the NHS. They have not been very helpful in that area, and so she's seeking private surgery. We'll put the link below. We wish Laura the best in her process. It's difficult. Finding your true self is never easy, but hopefully always fulfilling. Know that we in the program support you 110%, and hopefully people who are listening as well will help her out. I'd like to thank LuliPal once again for joining
My
us.
pleasure.
And as always, if you like this or any of my videos on my channel, please comment and subscribe, and we will see you when we see you. Good night.